I never thought a family lake day, a tradition steeped in laughter, lemonade and lazy afternoons, would end with me clawing at the surface of the water, gasping for air. While my grandson stood on the dock laughing. Jason. My Jason. At least that's who I thought he was. He had just turned 20, all swagger and attitude. That boy I once rocked to sleep, who clung to my leg at preschool drop-offs, was now a stranger with my blood in his veins. A stranger who shoved me, deliberately, cruelly, into the lake. I still hear his voice echoing in my ears, taunting me. Come on, Grandma. Let's see if you can still swim. Then cold hands. A shove. I hit the water like dead weight, the impact cracking through my joints. My chest seized. My arms flailed in panic. I hadn't swum in decades, not since my shoulder surgery. The doctor told me not to risk it again. I screamed, but it came out as bubbles. I swallowed lake water. My mind screamed louder than my lungs. This is happening. He pushed me, and no one moved. Not my son Richard. Not my daughter-in-law Michelle, who took a sip of her wine and muttered, "She's being dramatic." Not one of them flinched. They all just watched. Jason and his buddies howled with laughter. I remember surfacing once, sputtering, heart pounding, and locking eyes with my son. He looked away. Somehow, I made it to the edge of the dock. Instinct or adrenaline, or maybe some deep reserve of willpower. I don't know. But I crawled back up. Knees scraped, clothes drenched, teeth chattering. No one offered a towel. No one helped me up. Jason smirked. Guess you can swim. Tough old bird. Laughter. That same toxic laughter that would ring in my ears for days. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, soaked and trembling, while my family passed around burgers like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't nearly drowned for their entertainment. That moment wasn't about water. It was about worth. I walked slowly back toward the picnic table. Dolores's voice came to me. My best friend for over 40 years. She had told me just last week. People show their true colors when they think they don't need you anymore. I hadn't understood it then. Now I did. They didn't see me anymore. At home that evening, my cardigan still damp, I passed through the kitchen unnoticed. Jason lounged barefoot on my white rug, dripping lake water onto the tile. Richard scrolled through his phone, leaning against my kitchen counter. Michelle chatted about Airbnbs in Cancun. No one looked up. No one asked if I was okay. No one offered me dry clothes. I sat quietly at the edge of the breakfast table, heart still pounding. Not just from the lake water but from the weight of years. Years of giving, of forgiving, of being the emergency babysitter, the extra wallet, the invisible support beam holding up their lives. I remembered Jason at age 5, handing me a dandelion and whispering, "You're the best part of this house, Grandma." I remembered reading Goodnight Moon to him 100 times. I remember being his safe place. But what do you do when the safe place becomes the target? I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the same kitchen table, wrapped in a quilt my late husband Frank had picked out on their 40th anniversary trip to Vermont. The house was silent, eerily so. I sipped lukewarm tea and stared at a photo of Jason on the wall, age 10, all freckles and piano recital nerves. That boy was gone. What remained was a product of Richard and Michelle's world. A world where kindness was weakness and respect was optional. And maybe the worst part? I let it happen. Not in one day. Not with one decision. But slowly. Silently. I enabled it. I allowed myself to fade so they could shine. I mistook love for loyalty. And loyalty for servitude. At dawn, I stood in front of the mirror in my guest bathroom, the one no one else used. My reflection startled me. I looked like a woman washed up on her own shores. Hair matted. Eyes rimmed with red. But behind that tired face, something stirred. Resolve. The kind of resolve that doesn't scream or slam doors. The kind that writes quietly in a notebook with dates and details and observations. The kind that asks questions like, where is the university fund paperwork? What still has my name on it? How much do they assume I won't remember? Because if they could push me into the lake laughing, they could surely push me out of my own home when it was no longer convenient. I dried my journal with a hairdryer. The cover had gotten damp in the chaos, but the pages inside were dry. I wrote the date in one sentence, They will never get the chance to drown me again. That day I didn't make breakfast. I didn't wash the towels. I didn't ask how Jason's classes were going, or whether Michelle needed help watching the baby next door. I sat in the garden with my tea and let the silence stretch. Let them notice my absence, or not. They didn't. And that told me everything I needed to know. Evelyn Carter had spent her life believing silence was grace. But now she wielded it like a scalpel, deliberate, precise, and unflinching. After the lake incident, the house resumed its usual rhythm. Jason blasted music from his room. Michelle complained about meal prep. Richard checked emails over dinner, offering half nods as she passed. No one apologized. No one even mentioned what happened. They had decided to pretend it hadn't occurred, and assumed she would too. But Evelyn wasn't pretending. She was observing. She tucked her observations into a small notebook hidden behind the spice rack. Not the decorative journal her granddaughter once gave her. No, this one was plain gray. Unremarkable. Easy to miss. Easy to hide. In it, she recorded everything. Not just facts, but tones, the sighs, the eye rolls. The conversations they had when they thought she was asleep or hard of hearing. Tuesday, 7:43 p.m. Michelle told Richard she's done changing my diapers once I start losing it. She laughed. He didn't correct her. He just asked how soon the refinance paperwork would be done. They thought she was slipping. That suited her perfectly. She stopped correcting their assumptions. When they spoke over her, she stayed silent. When they whispered about power of attorney, she turned the TV volume up and nodded absently. Michelle began bringing brochures home from nearby retirement homes, leaving them carelessly on the kitchen counter like forgotten receipts. Evelyn read every one, and she waited. At the grocery store, she asked for paper instead of plastic. She didn't need the bags, but she wanted the receipts. She folded them carefully and wrote on the backs, names, amounts, conversations, evidence, patterns. Jason charged $148 on my card for entertainment. Said it was a subscription. It was liquor. He was drunk that night. She scheduled appointments she didn't need, doctor visits, optometrist checkups, and even a hearing test. Not to seek help, but to verify she was still sharp. Still able to track dates, balances, and medications. When the nurse complimented her memory, Evelyn smiled gently. "Thank you," she said. "I just have a lot to keep track of these days." She paid in cash. Every night before bed, she sat in her worn armchair and pulled the notebook from its hiding place. She reread the entries with a lawyer's eye. Not for vengeance, but for truth. For clarity. She'd given everything to this family. Birthdays, bailouts, babysitting. And they had repaid her with disregard. Her silence was not surrender. It was structure. Planning. Every quiet moment was a brick in the foundation of her escape. When Jason left dirty dishes on the table, she said nothing. When Michelle accidentally tossed out her medication organizer, Evelyn made a note. When Richard took a call on speaker and told someone, "Yeah, the house'll be ours soon. She's just tired lately," Evelyn circled the date 3 times. She began testing small boundaries. She hid her checkbook, changed her ATM PIN, told the bank to add voice verification. She bought a locking file cabinet and placed it in the guest room, saying it was for old tax records. No one asked questions. They didn't care enough to be curious. Then one morning she overheard Jason in the hallway. "I mean, seriously, if she dies this year, we're set. It's not like she's got friends. Just don't let her get too weird around Maya. We need that will airtight." Maya, her granddaughter, the only one who had noticed her absence at the lake. The only one who had sneaked back inside and sat with her in silence, a slice of cake trembling in her hands. "It's still your birthday," she had whispered. Even if they forgot. That moment, Evelyn had felt something she hadn't in years seen. She knew she wouldn't leave Maya behind. So Evelyn started rewriting more than just her days. She rewrote her story, reclaimed it. She pulled out old legal documents, ones no one remembered she still had. The deed to the house was joint with her late husband's name, but it had never been transferred. She consulted a lawyer quietly, discreetly. Mr. Bennett, her old friend from the community center, now semi-retired and grateful for a case that didn't involve divorce or DUIs. I need everything protected, she told him. And I want a clause added. Anyone who challenges it is automatically disinherited. He blinked, then smiled. You always were sharper than you looked. Evelyn returned home that afternoon with a folder of documents and a fire in her chest. She placed it beneath the floorboards in her bedroom, just beneath a loose plank she'd memorized decades ago. She marked it with a single dried flower pressed into the corner, one Maya had given her when she was 8. That night, she reheated her tea and sat once again in her armchair. She didn't feel frail. She didn't feel tired. She felt ready. If they wanted silence, they could have it. But in the silence, Evelyn was writing her final act. And this time, she wasn't giving them the pen. Evelyn Carter had always been the one to bake the birthday cakes, to stitch the loose buttons, to keep the peace when tempers flared. For decades, she poured herself into the people she loved, never asking for anything in return. But after the lake incident, something within her shifted. The woman they had pushed aside was still watching, still listening, and very much still in control. It started quietly. She called her oldest friend June, a retired accountant with a sharp tongue and a sharper memory. You still have that lawyer friend? Evelyn asked, her voice calm but firm. I thought you'd never ask, June replied. Peter Malone. Handles estates, trusts, and payback with a bow. 2 days later, Evelyn walked into Peter's office under the pretense of visiting June for lunch. Her hair was pinned neatly, and she wore the same pale blue sweater Jason had once complimented when he was 7. She carried no emotion on her face, just a leather-bound folder she had hidden in her closet for over a year. I'd like to make some changes, she told Peter. And I don't want anyone to know. Peter raised an eyebrow. To your will. To everything, she said. It's time I stop financing my own mistreatment. Inside that folder were the original trust documents, life insurance policies, property deeds, and the education fund paperwork. For years, she contributed quietly to a $60,000 university fund for Jason, a nest egg to ensure he could pursue whatever dreams he had. He once told her he wanted to be an engineer. Now all he engineered were sarcastic jabs and eye rolls. I want that fund donated, she said. All of it. To the Women's Legacy STEM Foundation. Peter nodded slowly. And the house? Gifted, she said. To the Carter Foundation for Senior Advocacy. I want it converted into a safe haven for elderly women who've been discarded by their families. And your remaining assets? I'll leave a small stipend to June. And the rest, split among senior centers in this state. Peter leaned back in his chair. You understand they'll be furious. I'm counting on it, she said. It took 3 weeks to finalize the legal changes. In that time, Evelyn maintained her act. She fumbled the salt at dinner. Forgot where she left her keys intentionally. Let Jason believe she was slipping. Daniel and Ruth whispered more freely now, confident she was on the brink of cognitive decline. She should consider assisted living, Ruth said one evening. She's not who she used to be. Evelyn smiled to herself in the hallway, hearing every word. At night she journaled. Not about the betrayal, she'd done enough of that. She wrote about silver pine trees, birdsong, and starting over. She clipped the confirmation email from the STEM Foundation and folded it neatly into an envelope labeled for Jason to remind him what he lost. The final step was the letter. She took her time with it. Days actually. She addressed it not to Jason or Daniel or Ruth, but to all three. To those who forgot who I am. In the letter, Evelyn was not a passive elder. She was precise. Surgical. I fed you, clothed you, paid your bills, bought your piano lessons, and forgave your silence. You mistook my generosity for obligation. You turned my home into a place of ridicule. But I remember everything. The lake. The laughter. The indifference. She paused, letting her pen hover. Then wrote, You pushed me once. You'll never get the chance again. The letter was printed, signed, and sealed with a duplicate copy in June's safe. The night before she left, Evelyn packed a single suitcase, 2 cardigans, 1 photo of her late husband, and her garden gloves. She left everything else, furniture, heirlooms, dishes, like a mausoleum of a life they never appreciated. She stood in the kitchen that last morning, the scent of coffee she'd brewed filling the silence. Her suitcase sat by the door. Daniel glanced at it, then returned to his phone. Ruth didn't even glance up. Jason wandered in half awake, muttering something about car keys. "Going somewhere, Grandma?" he asked, barely looking at her. "Just a short trip," she replied with a tight smile. She walked out without a goodbye. June's car waited at the curb, engine running, windows down. "You sure you want to do this?" June asked. Evelyn took a breath of morning air, crisp and full. "I've never been more sure of anything." They mailed the letter that afternoon. Certified. Tracked. 3 days later, the call started, first confused, then panicked. Peter handled them all. "No, she's not available." "Yes, the documents are real." "No, she's not sick. She's just done." Jason's financial aid officer confirmed the university fund had been donated. Ruth's voice cracked on the phone with Peter. But that was his future.
No, Peter replied.
It was hers to give. And she chose better. Back at the Carter home, confusion turned to chaos. Jason raged. Daniel blamed Ruth. Ruth sobbed into a couch pillow. But Evelyn? She was planting hydrangeas outside her new cottage at the Oak Haven Senior Collective, smiling as the breeze lifted her hair. In her new mailbox, she received only 2 things. A thank you letter from the STEM Foundation, and a note from a scholarship recipient. "Dear Ms. Carter," it read, "your gift changed my life. I want to help people breathe easier, just like my grandmother once did for me. Thank you." She folded the letter carefully and placed it inside her journal. That night, she sat on her porch with a cup of chamomile tea, the stars blinking overhead. They'd expected an inheritance. What they got was a reckoning. And Evelyn? She got her life back. Evelyn Carter didn't vanish. She reappeared just in a place no one thought to look. The Oak Haven Senior Collective wasn't luxurious, but it was peaceful. Nestled just outside Charlottesville, Virginia, it offered modest cottages with white picket fences, winding walking trails, and communal gardens that flourished year-round. Evelyn's unit, number 9, sat on the edge of the property, facing a grove of maple trees that blazed crimson every fall. It was there, far from the condescension and cruelty of her family, that Evelyn began again. The first morning in her new home. She awoke not to demands or slammed doors, but to birdsong and sunlight spilling through gauzy curtains. She boiled a kettle, steeped her tea, and sat by the window with nothing but the rustle of leaves to accompany her thoughts. It was the first time in years she'd felt the quiet as comfort, not punishment. At Oak Haven, no one asked about power of attorney. No one questioned her memory or mocked her handwriting. The residents were a patchwork of stories. Former teachers, artists, nurses, soldiers. Every Tuesday, they gathered in the common room to share updates, swap vegetables from their gardens, or play cards well into the evening. Evelyn joined the poetry circle on Thursdays, though she rarely shared at first. She preferred to listen, her pen quietly scribbling lines she hadn't known were still inside her. "I am not forgotten, I am not frail. I am not silence wrapped in pale." The director, Miss Ramona Jennings, greeted Evelyn by name every morning. "Morning, Miss Carter. Your daffodils are blooming beautifully." It was a small thing being remembered, but after decades of being glanced over, it felt radical. Evelyn didn't spend her days speaking of what she had escaped. She didn't waste breath on bitterness. Her joy was quieter than her pain had been, but far more profound. She tended a tiny herb garden beside her porch, lavender, mint, and rosemary. She learned the names of every staff member and remembered their birthdays. She called the local librarian and volunteered to read once a week to children from the nearby elementary school. And every Saturday, without fail, she wrote a letter to Maya. She never mailed them, but she kept them all in a wooden box labeled, "For when she's ready." "Dear Maya," one read, "the cake you brought me on my birthday meant more than the car your parents forgot to park for me. One day, you'll understand the power of being seen. And when you do, I hope you remember how much I saw in you." In this quiet new life, Evelyn learned to take up space again. Not with noise or conflict, but with presence. With choice. She wore bright scarves and bold lipstick. She laughed loudly at her friend Bernice's jokes. She took slow walks every evening with Ed, a former train conductor who still wore his old hat on Tuesdays, just because he liked how it felt. Sometimes a flicker of doubt crept in, a whisper asking if maybe she had been too harsh, if she should have given her family another chance. But then she would remember the lake, the laughter, the silence that followed when she cried out, and the way they looked past her, not at her, like furniture that creaked a little too much. No, she hadn't been cruel. She had been clear. Her story wasn't a tragedy. It was a return. At Oak Haven, Evelyn became known not as someone who left her family, but as someone who chose herself. Her resilience inspired others. Miss Ramona invited her to speak at the annual gathering for new residents. Evelyn stood behind the microphone, hands steady, voice strong. "They tell us aging is a process of losing," she said. "Losing independence, losing relevance, losing dignity. But what if aging is just editing? A chance to keep what matters and let go of what doesn't. I lost people, yes, but I gained myself, and I am not sorry." Applause filled the room, not out of politeness but respect. In the months that followed, Evelyn's days fell into a rhythm. Morning tea, garden walks, letters to Maya, poetry drafts, community dinners. And peace, so much peace. She didn't need a spotlight. She didn't need revenge. She needed her name, her voice, her place. And now she had all three. She was Evelyn Carter. Not a burden. Not a wallet. Not a shadow in someone else's house. She was a woman who had dared to rewrite the end of her story. Boldly, quietly, without apology. And in doing so, she didn't just reclaim her life. She redefined what it meant to grow older with power, with purpose, and with the kind of grace that doesn't ask permission. The Carter home was unusually quiet the morning after Evelyn's funeral. No brunch spread.
No polite laughter.
Just a dining table cluttered with untouched food and paperwork, and a family grappling with a reality they never saw coming. Jason sat slumped on the couch, his phone buzzing every few minutes with unread messages from friends who had heard the news. His mother, Cheryl, stood at the window clutching a lukewarm coffee, staring into the backyard where it had all unraveled. The day Evelyn's lawyer, Mr. Barnett, read the will, the entire family had arrived in their finest, dressed not for mourning, but for what they assumed would be a well-earned reward. Jason wore the same navy blazer Evelyn had once bought him for his graduation. Cheryl dabbed under her eyes with a tissue before they even entered the conference room, hoping it looked like grief. But the air shifted the moment Mr. Barnett opened the folder and cleared his throat. Mrs. Evelyn Carter left behind a legally binding, recently updated will, certified 6 months before her passing. In sound mind and witnessed by 2 neutral parties. Cheryl sat up straighter. As per her instructions, there will be no division of assets to her immediate family. The words landed like a slap. No property. No financial holdings. No trust accounts. Jason blinked, stunned. "That university fund," he began, but Mr. Barnett continued without looking up, "was donated in full to the Southern Alliance for Senior Autonomy, along with the family home, which will be converted into a transitional housing unit for elderly women leaving abusive or neglectful situations." Cheryl dropped her coffee. "Excuse me," she hissed. Jason stood. "That's a mistake. Grandma said I'd be taken care of." Mr. Barnett raised an eyebrow and slid a sealed envelope across the table. "She left letters. One for each of you." Jason's hand shook as he opened his. To Jason, "You were once a boy who brought me dandelions and kissed my hand when I was tired. That boy is gone. What's left is someone who learned to perform affection only when it's rewarded. I mourn that loss every day. This isn't punishment. It's protection. For me. From you. Evelyn." Cheryl opened hers with more force. To Cheryl, "You spent your life performing motherhood and calling it love. When I coughed blood, you sent a prayer emoji. When I fell, you posted a filtered memory. You cared deeply, but only when someone else was watching. My absence from your party wasn't a mistake. It was a mirror." Evelyn. No one spoke for a long time. It was Lana, Evelyn's younger daughter, who finally whispered, "She meant it. Every word." Mr. Barnett nodded. She gave specific instructions. No memorial flowers, no plaques, no eulogies from family. She wanted a simple goodbye, and that her true legacy be written not in marble, but in memory. The silence that followed was colder than grief. Jason broke first. "This is messed up. She's punishing us because we didn't read her mind." "No," Lana said quietly. "Because we stopped treating her like a person." Back at home, the arguments began. She was clearly manipulated. Cheryl snapped, pacing. "That nurse and the doctor, what were their names again? They sunk their claws into her." "She left you nothing too," Jason reminded her. "So what claws did I have?" "She was senile," Cheryl added, refusing to sit. "Sick. Vulnerable." "No," Lana said again. "She was just tired. Tired of asking to be noticed. Tired of being celebrated without being included. Tired of waiting for someone to ask how she was, without it being followed by a request for money, or help, or silence." Days passed. The sympathy cards slowed. The texts became fewer. And the reality settled like dust on all their shoulders. Evelyn Carter had not just died. She had chosen her ending. With clarity. With intention. And without apology. Across the state line. In a sunny common room at Oak Haven, Miss Ramona Jennings carefully unwrapped a package addressed to the center. Inside was a plaque, wooden, carved with care, and attached to a short handwritten note. "Please place this near the community garden if you think it belongs there."
Hey.
Ramona turned the plaque over. It read, "Respect is the only inheritance I ever asked for. You gave it freely. Thank you." It was signed simply Evelyn. That weekend, a modest ceremony was held by the garden.
No speeches.
Just a small gathering of residents, staff, and 2 out-of-town visitors. Samantha and Dr. Elias Monroe. They didn't wear black. Evelyn had asked that no one wear black for her. Samantha placed a single white daffodil at the base of the plaque. "She used to call these her stubborn flowers," she smiled. "Said they came back every year, no matter how ignored they'd been." Dr. Monroe stood beside her, silent, but smiling in that quiet way Evelyn had once trusted above all else. There were no reporters. No headlines. But the legacy Evelyn left behind rippled. A scholarship fund was opened in her name for elder care students. The old Carter home welcomed its first 2 residents, both women in their 70s who had nowhere else to go. And at a small clinic near Charlottesville, a young volunteer named Maya started her first shift, bringing with her a well-worn bracelet shaped like a swallow, and a promise whispered to no one but herself. "I will see them. I will not forget." Because sometimes, a life well lived is not measured in what we keep, but in what we leave behind. And Evelyn Carter left behind clarity. Respect, once lost, comes at a cost. And love, when absent of care, is not enough to earn forgiveness. Not anymore. Have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people who claim to love you? Evelyn Carter's story is more than a family reckoning. It's a mirror for anyone who has been overlooked, dismissed, or taken for granted in their later years. Her quiet strength reminds us that dignity is not something to be begged for. It's something to be reclaimed. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is not forgiveness, but truth. Evelyn didn't lash out. She simply withdrew the parts of herself that were once freely given, her home, her trust, her support, and offered them instead to those who saw her value without conditions. This story poses a deep question. At what point does protecting your peace matter more than preserving appearing for older adults especially, who are so often expected to understand, endure, or be the bigger person? Evelyn's choice offers a radical alternative, one rooted in self-respect and clarity. Aging doesn't mean fading away. It means editing your life to hold only what lifts you. So ask yourself, have you been giving away pieces of yourself just to coo?